Introduction. The first Spanish explorers came to North America more than 500 years ago. When they arrived, there were already more Native Americans living here, millions of them, some historians say. The Native Americans were divided into different tribes. Each tribe had its own language and its own way of living. Some hunted whales, some hunted buffalo, some were farmers. Many tribes never even met each other because they lived so far apart. This book is about the Hopi tribe. They lived in the high desert of Arizona, 100 miles east of the Grand Canyon. Like many other Native American tribes of the southwestern United States, the Hopi were known as Pueblo Indians. Pueblo is the Spanish word for village, and all these Indians lived in villages, which houses made of stone and clay. Hopi means the peaceful and wise people. They believed that it was best to try to live in peace and harmony with the world around them. The Hopi still live in the same place they have lived for more than 1,000 years. They were never forced to leave their land the way most other Indian tribes were, and some of the ancient villages were standing today. In fact, if you wanted to visit the oldest town in America where people still live, you would go to Arabi, the land of the Hopi. Would you live in a teepee? No. The Hopi were farmers, not hunters. They stayed in one place and built their villages near their fields and springs. It was the Plains Indians who lived in teepees. They were hunters and had to follow the buffalo herds, so they needed houses they could fold up and carry with them. Hopi houses were made of stone and clay and had flat roofs. They looked like apartment buildings and were often 2 or 3 stories high. Nobody lived on the ground floor. That was used for storing things. To enter your house, you climbed up a ladder. Then you walked across the roof and into the front door. Your house was a busy place. Women ground corn, wove baskets, and cooked food, all inside if the weather was bad. In good weather, everyone worked, ate, and sometimes even slept outside on the flat roof. The smell of corn, pudding, or stew with wild onions filled the air. When you were ready for supper, everyone sat on the floor and ate out of a big clay pot. The Hopi did not use dinner tables or chairs. Who would live in your house? Your house would be full of relatives. There would be your sisters and your brothers and your mother and your father and lots of other relatives. Hopi women didn't leave their home when they got married because a house belonged to all the women who lived in it. It was the husbands who moved in with them. So you would also be living with your aunts and uncles and cousins and great aunts and great uncles. Your grandmother was the head of the household. So, of course, she and your grandfather would live there too. You might have 10, 15, or even 20 relatives living with you. They would all be working together so that everyone was taken care of. What happened if your house got too crowded? Sometimes there were so many people living in your house that you ran out of room. Then something had to be done. One thing was certain. You would never have to leave and have no place to go. The Hopi had a much better way of solving the problem. They added more rooms. It didn't cost anything to make your house bigger. All it took was hard work. You just went outside the village and gathered what you needed. You'd get stones and clay for making the walls and floor, and you'd get grass, brush, and mud for making the roof. There was only one thing that was hard to get: the wooden beams needed for holding up the roof. That was because the Hopi had no forest near their villages. It took the men days to haul the heavy tree trunks down from Black Mesa forests that were miles away. While all the materials were ready, everyone helped to build the new rooms. If your house was really crowded, you might have to add a whole extra story. How would you keep warm? You didn't worry about keeping warm. Even during the coldest winter, you could make a fire with sticks from juniper and greasewood bushes, which you'd gather from the desert. There was a rule: never return home empty-handed. By the time everyone had brought a few sticks, there'd be a nice little pile of wood for the fire. Still, there wasn't enough wood around to keep the houses warm all winter. But the Hopi had discovered another way to keep warm: coal. Coal looks like a black rock, and it burns and produces heat. The Hopi were among the first people in the world to use coal for heating their homes. Coal lay on the ground near the surface, and there was plenty of it. You dig it out by hand and carry it back to your house. The ancient Hopi used a lot of coal. One village, called Owatavi, is believed to have burned 450 pounds a day. Who would take care of you? First, of course, there would be your mother, who would love you and take care of you. But your mother's sisters, your aunts, would also take care of you. They would live in your house with you. They would treat you like one of their own children and help raise you. You'd call them Niguu, which is the Hopi word for mother. If something should ever happen to your mother, your aunts would take over your mother's job of raising you. And, of course, they would get lots of help from your father, your grandparents, and other people in your clan. What was a clan? A clan was made up of people who were related to you through your mother's female ancestors. A clan might have hundreds of people in it. Everyone belonged to a clan. The minute you were born, you would be a member of your mother's clan. Maybe it would be the Snake Clan or the Greasewood Clan. Maybe it would be the Sun Clan or one of the many other Hopi clans. When you grew up, you'd have to make sure that the person you wanted to marry was from a different clan. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed to get married. Why was a clan so important? A clan was like a big family. Each clan had its own special history of how it arrived in the land of the Hopi and its special duties. To know your clan was to know where you came from and where you belonged. It was very important to be part of a clan. If you were in trouble, members of your clan helped out. If you traveled to another Hopi village, you could visit clan members there. Clans controlled all the farmland. Each clan had its own piece of land, which was divided up among the women of the clan. If you were a girl, you'd grow up to own land from your clan. Each clan also had its own religious ceremonies. These clan ceremonies were thought to have special powers to help all the Hopi people. How would you get your name? You wouldn't have just one name. You'd have different names at different times in your life. When you were born, you'd get your first name at your naming ceremony. Your name would show which clan your father belonged to. If he was from the Bear clan, you might be called Hantashi, which means bear moccasins. If your father was the Water clan, they might call you Batati, which means water all over. But you would not have a last name. The Hopi never used them. When you were 6 years old, you would be given a new name in religious ceremony, and you'd get another name when you became an adult. That is the name you would keep for the rest of your life. But there would be one last name, a silent name. It would be given to you when you died. The name would never be spoken. The funeral attendant would only think it, so only she and your spirit would ever know what it was. That is the name you would take with you to your new spirit home. When would you first go outside? As soon as a baby was born, blankets were hung over the windows and entrances. No sunlight was allowed to shine on the mother and the new baby. Otherwise, the Hopi believed, great harm would come to them both. So when you were born, you stayed indoors for the first 19 days. But the 20th day was different. Before the sun rose, your grandmother gave you a name at the sacred naming ceremony. Your father, meanwhile, was outside watching for the sunrise. At just the right moment, he gave us. Now was the time for you to be taken outside. Your grandmother would lift you up towards the sun, and as the first rays of sun touched your face, you were presented to Tawa, the sun god and great giver of life. What clothes would you wear? Children wore the same kind of clothes as adults. If you were a girl, you'd wear a manta. It looked like a dress, but it was really a black cotton blanket wrapped around you and fastened together on your right shoulder. You would tie a sash around your waist to keep the manta in place. If you were a boy, you'd wear a breechcloth or kilt. If you got cold, you'd wear loose pants and a shirt. Most of your clothes were made out of cotton, not deerskin. There were very few deer around to hunt, but the Hopi had plenty of cotton. They grew it themselves. Everyone wore leggings in cold weather. Sometimes you wore sandals, and sometimes moccasins. The sandals were made from the yucca plant, and the moccasins were made of deerskin. In winter, if you were really cold, you might wear a blanket made of strips of rabbit skin woven together. In summer, when it was warm, young children usually wore nothing at all. Where would you find water? The Hopi didn't have any lakes or rivers, so you couldn't go there to get water. But they did have springs. A spring is a place where water comes out of the ground. Springs were very important. The Hopi could not have lived in the desert without them. Springs were located at the bottom of the mesas where the Hopi lived. A mesa is a small, flat-topped mountain. When it rained or snowed, the mesa acted like a giant sponge. The water seeped into the mesa and then very slowly made its way down. It took almost 2 years for the water to reach the bottom. Only a little water trickled out into the open at one time. So the Hopi dug holes around the springs to collect the water. This is where you went to get your water for drinking and cooking and for watering your small vegetable garden. This is also where you bathed, even in the winter. And the colder the better, for the Hopi believed that cold baths help you live longer. Why did the Hopi carve holes in the mesa rock? The Hopi needed more water than they could get from the springs. They knew that, in the desert, every drop counted, so each family had a deep, wide hole, called a cistern, which had been carved out of the mesa rock. The cistern was a place for storing extra water for your family. In the summer, it filled with rainwater. In the winter, it filled with melting snow. Sometimes you and your family would pack lots of extra snow around the cistern just to make sure it filled up. Carving a cistern out of rock was very hard work. One Hopi man, Don Televisa, remembers his grandfather talking about the cistern he had carved long ago. His grandfather had made it when he got married so that his children and grandchildren would never go thirsty. Eat? You would eat corn every day. The Hopi grew many different kinds of corn: yellow, white, blue, speckled, and red. At harvest time, you'd eat fresh roasted corn on the cob, but most of the time your food would be made from ground up dry corn called cornmeal. If you think that sounds boring, you'd be wrong. The Hopi could make just about anything from cornmeal. One of their favorites was piki bread, a kind of pancake made from blue cornmeal. They made other breads and delicious soups, porridges, and dumplings, even snacks and desserts. You'd also eat lots of squash and beans, and you'd eat wild plants and seeds, which you'd help your mother gather in the desert. In the summer, there were wild potatoes and berries. In the fall, there were piñon nuts. Piñon nuts were one of the Hopi's favorite treats. In the springtime, you would eat wild greens, like the Rocky Mountain beeweed, which tasted just like spinach. The Hopi ate very little meat. Sometimes you had a rabbit, and once in a while some deer or antelope meat, but you wouldn't eat fish. Can you guess corn grow in the desert? If the Hopi had tried to plant the kind of corn you find in today's Kansas or Iowa, they wouldn't have been able to make it grow. But the Hopi had a special kind of corn, desert corn. This corn had been grown by their ancestors for thousands of years. It had very long roots, sometimes as long as 15 feet, so it could reach down to the moisture that was deep in the ground. The long roots also helped in another important way. They kept the plant from being blown away by strong desert winds. Where did the Hopi plant their corn? The Hopi planted most of their corn seeds near dry steam beds, called washes. Once in a while there would be a violent rainstorm. Then the water would rush down the mesas and into the washes. There would usually be so much water that some of it would overflow onto the cornfields. The Hopi also discovered another place to plant their corn, the sand dunes. Now you might think that a dune is completely dry, but it actually holds a lot of water. How would you keep the corn from spoiling? One of the best ways to keep food from spoiling is to dry it. All you need is hot, dry air, and the Hopi had plenty of that. After a harvest, everyone husked the corn and spread the corn cobs out on the roofs. When the corn cobs were stacked on shelves, dry corn lasted for years. When you were ready to cook, you scraped the kernels off the corn cob. Then you ground the kernels in cornmeal on special grinding stones called the sun watcher. The Hopi didn't need a calendar to tell them when to start planting their seeds or celebrate their religious ceremonies. They just asked their new sun watcher. When the sun rose at a certain spot on the horizon, the sun watcher knew it was time to plant the seeds. When it rose at different spots, he knew it was time for the snake dance ceremony, or the home dance. It was very important to plant your seeds at the right time. Planting at the wrong time could mean disaster for everyone in your village. That was because Hopi corn took a long time to ripen, and the growing season in the desert is short, so you had to know just when to start. If you planted the seeds too early, the spring frost might kill the young shoots. If you planted the seeds too late, the corn might not ripen in time before the cold weather set in. Then there would be no harvest and no food, so it was very important to listen to the sun watcher.